The new federal constitution for the Republic of Mexico was important to Texas for two reasons. It allowed continued Anglo settlement in Texas, and it was silent on slavery. This meant that each state would decide whether slavery would exist in its borders under the federal system. Each state had to have its own constitution. Since Texas did not have enough people in it to be a state, it joined neighboring Coahuila. Thus, any new state constitution had to take into account the interests of far more people than those in Texas. Despite his importance in the settling of Texas, Stephen F. Austin was not at the convention. Instead, he deputized his brother James to go and report back to him. Baron de Bastrop was the lone Texas representative at the Constitutional Convention. Texans paid attention to it because it had the ability to abolish slavery. As the delegates met in Saltillo, events in Texas could have endangered it. Austin was not the only American who could bring settlers. Hayden Edwards also brought Americans into Texas, settling 800 near the Louisiana border. However, his lack of diplomacy angered local Hispanics. He demanded proof of ownership from pre-existing landowners, or their holdings would become subject to sale. He also meddled in a mayoral election when he certified his son-in-law as the victor, despite receiving less votes. Residents appealed to the authorities in San Antonio, who supported the actual victor. It took involvement from the local militia to correct the result. The situation got so bad that reports of what was happening reached the desk of the Mexican president, Guadalupe Victoria. He ordered that Edwards's contracts be thrown out. This would have been a financial disaster for Edwards, who had $50,000 or nearly $2 million in 2026 invested in the venture. In reaction to his removal, Edwards and his followers, about 12 in total, declared Texas independent, establishing the Republic of Fredonia. He had hoped that other settlers, especially Stephen F. Austin and his 3,000 colonists, would support him, which ultimately never materialized. Austin was livid. He feared that a rebellion in Texas would affect developments in Saltillo, but the state government was debating whether to allow slavery. The state legislature was mostly from Coahuila, not Texas. Austin actively opposed the rebellion. He joined a cavalry unit and put down the rebellion. When it became clear that the support Edwards hoped for was not forthcoming, he fled to Louisiana. The rebellion was short-lived but significant. It confirmed the fears of Mexican officials in both Saltillo and Mexico City that the Americans were rebellious. It didn't matter that there were just 13 people. In March 1827, the convention produced its constitution. Out of the hundreds of articles, only one, Article 13, concerned slavery. It stated, "From and after the promulgation of the Constitution in the capital of each district, no one shall be born a slave in the state, and after 6 months the introduction of slaves under any pretext shall not be permitted." The Coahuilan majority was too strong to allow slavery, but they recognized its importance to the economy. Thus, the article was a compromise. To Texans, this would be a disaster that would destroy American settlements. Austin was so upset that he called a meeting of his leaders, including Jared Gross, the area's largest slaveholder. To him, it was a disaster that would stop settlers from coming from the American South. At the meeting, Austin and his settlers devised a plan to keep their slaves without violating any provision of the new Constitution. They pressured the state government to pass a law recognizing the legality of contracts signed in the United States. The plan was for a settler to make their way to Texas by first stopping in Louisiana and free their slaves. In exchange for that freedom, the now former slaves would sign labor contracts for 99 years. It was a loophole since they would not be slaves, but laborers studying agricultural and domestic arts. With the plan in place, Austin arranged for Jose Antonio Navarro to propose the legislation, known as Decree 56, in the spring of 1828. Navarro claimed that some settlers were from Ohio and were concerned that their contracts would be invalid in Texas. The members agreed, and they passed it. In response, Austin created a contract for any potential settler to fill out. He would enter the name of the slave, state that they were going to be an apprentice for 99 years, and get it notarized to circumvent Mexican law. He then published the plan in a New Orleans newspaper. How long would it take for the Mexican government to realize it had the wool pulled over its eyes? The answer is not very long. New Orleans was the last stop for American settlers going into Texas. Many slave owners would free their slaves, then get labor contracts signed and notarized. Coincidentally, the largest notary in the entire city was across the street from the Mexican consulate. Curious as to why so many people were getting labor contracts notarized, the consul crossed the street and asked what was going on. The notary revealed that the Texans had figured out a way to get around Mexican law. In response, the consul wrote to the government about what was happening. This was just one issue Mexico was facing as the 1820s progressed.